welcome back to my channel. Sorry it's been a hot minute since I've posted a video, but I have been hard at work completing the second draft of my book. So that's what I wanted to talk about in this video today. Just my process of getting through the second revision and kind of tips and tricks to get through writing in general, because completing something always feels like the hardest part. So let's get started. And just for some context, this is my first book. It is in the fantasy genre. I am looking to go into traditional publishing, and yeah. So this is my first draft. I completed it in February of 2018. I began writing it in February of 2017. So it took pretty much exactly a year, and I was very much a pantser throughout it because I've never written anything of that scale before. And I was kind of surprised that I was writing it at that scale, so it took a lot of discovery purely through writing. But I knew when I completed it, when I spent the $12 to print this thing out at the library, that it was going to need an ungodly amount of revision because there was just so many things. I loved the story, and I loved especially like my climax and where I wanted things to go, because I'm also intending this to be a series, but it just needed a lot of work. So what I did shortly after I completed it is I made bullet points of every single chapter, and not necessarily of the chapters I've just written, but of what I want the book to be. So I did very long, elaborate bullet points. I think this was like 20 pages. I tried to be as thorough as possible while still making it somewhat manageable to look through, just kind of the highlights of each chapter, so you can get a general idea of the characters and the arc of the story and of the characters. And I sent these bullet points out to my very trusted friends who will also be my beta readers. I'm very lucky to be surrounded by people who are very talented and invested also in storytelling. So that's what a lot of this like scribbling writing is I got a lot of feedback from them, and between my first draft and the second draft, I probably changed 90% of what I had written. So 90% of this is gone now. Not gone forever, because I will always keep it on my computer and obviously this copy, but for the new draft, it's just so different now. A lot of the characters are the same, the setting, the Celtic inspiration for it is the same, but character motivations and specific plot points, that all so drastic. A POV character was cut out. It was a lot of revising. So I started a brand new Word document, and I just basically rewrote the book. And I did chapter by chapter. So each chapter I started a new Word document for. The reason I did this was because I didn't want to be as hung up on word count as I was for the first book. And this one, I personally see chapters as like mini arcs. I wanted to focus on those details within that mini arc of the chapter. Felt like it also kept me from editing my previous work, instead of just scrolling up and like, ooh, let me work on this previous chapter instead of moving forward with my first chapter. I'd have to like find the chapter, open it back up, and like consciously know that I was kind of wasting time. So I literally just completed the second draft this Friday. It's very exciting, and yet it just feels like the amount of work I still have to do just keeps on growing. So what I do, and I suggested this in a previous video about writing, but it is so helpful, is probably one of the most helpful things that I use when working on my book, and that is keeping a notebook and writing down ideas or things or people that you need to add to the stories. So like these are all things that I need to go back through and add. And granted, part of this is like it's a fantasy series, so I'm creating my own world. There's just a lot of little details that I think about in hindsight that I need to add. Some of it also because it's a series, so there's some things that I need to kind of Easter egg in there for this book, and it will pay off later in future books. I also found it really, really helpful when I came to a section where I knew there'd be a lot of dialogue to write out my dialogue just very roughly, like no dialogue tags or anything, to just be like, okay, is this where I want the conversation to go? Are these the correct details and kind of emotional beats that I want brought up? The notebook, if you were to take anything away from this video, if you are writing, get a notebook. Then if you think of something that you realize you need to add to the first chapter, you don't need to stop what you're doing and stop your progress and go add that in right away, or else you'll forget it. You can still continue onward and then just have everything you need in this handy dandy notebook. So I'm gonna be spending the next week really going over this thing and thinking about all the work I'll need to do. But I know for my upcoming third revision, I am not going to start over again. This draft feels a lot more solid than my first one. The first one was kind of, like I said, I definitely pantsed it. I definitely was just exploring. But this one, this is like, okay, this is a story that just needs a lot of revision and editing. So another thing to keep me motivated, because this is just a lot of free time that you have to spend working on this thing, I found that playing around with schedules and reward really worked for me. When I first started, I made like a very strict schedule of like, I'm gonna complete 2 chapters every week and I'm gonna mark it off when I'm done, and I realized that 2 chapters was a little ambitious for me, but I could do about a chapter a week. And if I finish my chapter by the end of the week, I always get Sundays off. So it's like, if I finish my chapter by the end of the week, then I can use the Sunday to actually relax from both my job and from writing. So that was kind of a good motivation for me too. Or if I was going to go out with friends on a Friday or Saturday night, it's like, well, I better get that chapter done, or I'm gonna feel real guilty when I go out. Those little things I find to be really useful. I have a bunch of sticky notes that you can kind of see up there, and I also put like chapter 11 sticky note on my wall in front of my bed, so I'd wake up every day and be like, gotta work on chapter 11 today. And then when it was done, I moved it over to its little completed pile. That's like the completed chapter, so it's really cool to be like, all 16 chapters are done. Oh, thank God. Another thing, and I didn't actually start getting into this until about halfway through this draft. When I wrote out my first draft, I didn't like listening to music. I would literally go into YouTube and look up like coffee shop ambiance, or like I wanted it to be completely silent. And maybe that was just because I needed more concentration when working on the story, because I was so unsure of where I was going. But for this draft, I realized, no, I really want to be in the mood. So I was looking up like epic Celtic music. Celtic music, by the way, guys, is so much fun, and now I have to listen to it all the time. It's becoming my favorite genre of music, and I just feel like it just gets me such in the mood to work on my writing. And so I just love ambiance music in general, and just kind of discovering, there's a whole thing on YouTube with different really fun, really specific medieval, fairy, folkland, Celtic music, really specific genres, and it can just put you in such a mood. Another thing that has been quite a joy is getting more into reading. I feel like with my first draft, I wasn't reading as much, and for the second one, I have just been flying through books. I have during the second draft, I think I've read 6 books thus far, and I'm working on 2 now, and I'm definitely going to be talking about them more in future videos. But I've kind of been just sticking to my genre too. I remember reading a Stephen King quote about it, that you need to read if you want to write. That is just the best way to learn, and it's so true. And if you're like me and you're totally addicted to YouTube and podcasts, I have been super into more author and writing related videos and podcasts. My number one recommendation with podcasts would be Pub Crawl. It's 2 ladies who've worked in the industry as an editor and a literary agent, and they just go pretty hard into the technical details and behind the scenes and contracts and royalties, but they'll also still talk about character building and tropes. And I found that I've learned a lot by listening to them, and it kind of keeps me motivated too, because it's like, oh, I'm so excited now to... That was my laundry. And it just gets me so pumped because personally, I love kind of the business side of things. So I'm so excited to like finally complete my book so I can hopefully dip my toe in that realm. I've also been watching a lot of Alexa Dunn and her YouTube channel, and she just got her like YA sci-fi book published and has been talking a lot how getting your book traditionally published works. For me, I find it extremely motivating and entertaining. Something that I absolutely love was getting into queries. A query is kind of like a really short cover letter that you send out when you're looking for a literary agent. And they're notoriously difficult to do. So I got really into sites like Query Shark to see examples and kind of the Query Shark like take down all these query letters and the ones who didn't do it properly, but also talk about the ones that did. Sometimes when I wasn't feeling motivated, I would work on my own query letter, and I'm also going to need to work on my synopsis, which is also very difficult. It just gets me so like, oh my gosh, this is real. Like, I'm this much closer to publishing my book. I mean, it still feels like forever away. I can see the light at the end of the tunnel. It just makes me so excited to work and get done. So that's all the advice I have for you guys today. Please leave a comment down below if you have any writing advice of your own. Like I said, I've been reading a lot more, so I'm definitely going to be getting into more like book reviews. I'm really excited to be back. I hope to hear from you guys, and I'll see you next time. Bye.